So this is the SiriusXM Raymarine weather webinar. If you are not a Raymarine customer, if you have a Garmin or Furuno or a Simrad Lowrance B&G unit, we do have specific webinars for you. And if needed, we'll give you email contact information, or you can always reach out to us, marine.support@SiriusXM.com, and ask for recordings of those webinars. But this is specifically geared towards Raymarine weather customers. So without further ado, let's jump in. We've got probably about 45 minutes to an hour worth of content this evening. We are going to be chatting throughout with you, and we encourage, Dan, if you go back up to the chat screen, we're going to encourage everybody to use the chat feature, and it looks like most of you have got this down. So as we go through the sections, we encourage you to include your questions, and then we're going to stop, I think, 4 different times throughout this entire webinar to answer specific questions about the section that we just reviewed. All right. So what makes SiriusXM weather different? This is up-to-date graphical weather displayed directly on your multifunction display. It's complete coverage via satellite. So this is not limited to the range of cellular networks. As a lot of you offshore folks, if you're cruising offshore or fishing offshore, you'll know that 6 to 8 to 10 miles out, depending on where you are, your cell signal drops out. And because we're satellite based, it's not contingent on that, and that is not a concern. If you look at this blue area, shaded area around the United States on the right-hand side of your screen here, what you'll see is our coverage area. And the coverage area is roughly 150 to 200 miles around the United States or North America. All right, so I am Jeff Leach, based out of the Washington, D.C. office. And I work for the Marine division of SiriusXM, and also presenting is Dan Dickerson. Dan's also based in the DC office, and Dan covers aviation and marine. And then we're also real fortunate to have Jeff Fletcher of Hooked Up Fishing Team join us this evening. Thank you, Jeff, for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
No problem. I'm happy to do it.
Great. Jeff's a Raymarine Pro ambassador. Fishes a ton of tournaments, has a lot of experience using our weather, and it certainly applies to whether you're a fisherman or you're a cruiser. Jeff's here to answer questions and chime in regarding his experiences using the service. All right, so let's jump right in. Where does the data come from? SiriusXM partnered with TWC, otherwise known as the Weather Channel Company. TWC actually aggregates all the data from NOAA and other sources, and then we feed it down to you via our satellites. The data updates at different rates. So storm radar and lightning, there is a slight latency. It's every 2 to 5 minutes. Wind and wave updates every 20 minutes, and sea surface temperatures update every 3 hours.
Okay. So here we're going to jump in. Those of you that have Raymarine MFDs, in order to view the weather, you go to the chart screen on your MFD. And when you're on the chart screen, then you can select from the menu. If you have a SiriusXM receiver installed, that weather button is going to be able to be selected, and you'll get a green check box. And then below that, there's a settings menu you can go to. And I always like to take people to the settings menu. You'll notice there's a weather button. If you select it, at the bottom of this page, you're going to see a couple of key pieces of information. Number one is your signal strength. If you've called us and subscribed to weather and it's not working, first thing to go see is take a look and see if you're getting signal, because if you're not getting signal, it's not going to work. If you're getting a good signal and it's still not working, then either it could be because your subscription hasn't taken effect, or if the display had been turned off for, say, a couple of months, it may have lost its subscription status, may have forgotten it. And then what we need to do is send it what we call a refresh signal. And to do that, you need your receiver ESN number. Sometimes we call it an ESN, sometimes it's called a radio ID. But that's that number right there. That's what you can contact us with, and you can either call us, or if you know you have an active subscription, it's very easy to go to SiriusXM.com/refresh and just put this number in, and that sends a signal out to wake up your receiver if it's gone dormant on you. So that's the importance of having that ESN number. So going back to the chart screen from our menu, we select weather layers, and now we're going to go in and start turning stuff on and taking a look at it. First thing being weather radar. This is the first key feature that probably 90% of our users select SiriusXM for, is having this weather information. And as Jeff mentioned, it works offshore extremely well. So here we're looking at a picture of a storm, and you can see various colors. The light green is light rain, dark green is heavier, and then it goes all the way up to red, where that would be like cats and dogs. You'll notice the image is what we call pixelated, little squares. And the reason it is set up that way is because that is the way the raw data is fed down to the receiver from the satellite, pixel by pixel. And that is the actual representation. Those of you that have been using weather apps on your phones, your image looks a little cleaner than this. And that's because using a phone, using the internet, you can get much higher resolution than we are able to use sending a signal from a satellite thousands of miles away to an antenna on your boat that's only about 3 inches in diameter. We have to lower the resolution so you get this pixelated image. However, the edge of that storm is the edge of that storm, pixel or no. So the information is still there and still giving you what you need to know. It's just not as crisp looking as you see it if you're looking at it on the internet. It's also important to note that we can animate the image, meaning you can see which way a storm has been moving. So if you select the animation feature, you hit the play button, and this is what it looks like when a storm moves. If that cursor was us, we'd see that storm moving towards us, and we'd be able to see if there's some way to get around it or get away from it, and perhaps stay dry or at least stay out of the worst part of it. So that's the animation feature.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dan. I love using the animation feature. Not only I'll put the Stormcast on also, but when you animate, it really gives you a perspective on how much time you have to either get out of the way, find safe harbor, or pick a line to drive through the storm.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so next we've gone back to the weather layer menu, and we've selected cities, and you can see these icons that show up on the screen. These are major city locations that are giving like a 7-day forecast of what the weather conditions are going to be like. And you can tap and hold on one of those, and it's going to bring up this information box, and you'll see this box a lot throughout the seminar. And basically on this one, when there's a city information available, you can tap on that area, and then it's going to bring up that multi-day forecast that I just talked about. So you can see what's going to be happening at that location over the next couple of days.
Okay, so here's where we pause for questions, and thanks again for being engaged chatters. There are already some questions coming in. So a couple right off the bat that are appropriate given the slides that we've shown to date. And Dan, I'll give this one to you, but here's a Roja question from a Roja. Sailing the East Coast, everything seems to work fine. Out in the Bahamas, lots of data unavailable. Why is this?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons, a couple of possibilities here. Number one, if you're getting out, way out into the Bahamas, you may be getting onto the area where our signal starts to weaken. So if you don't have a real good receiver installation, it'll slow down the download process of data. That's kind of the rarest of the reasons. Second reason is not all the data is out there. A lot of the weather data that we use is from NOAA, and the Bahamas doesn't have a compatible weather service that we can get data from. So we can only give you the data that's available. The radar is a good example. There are not radar towers. There's not NEXRAD radar in the Bahamas. There are some new installations, and we are able to give radar in some areas, but a lot of times if you're looking at a storm on your screen and you're in the Bahamas, the image that you're seeing is actually coming from the radar array in Miami. because that has about 180-mile range. But because of the curvature of the Earth, it loses some of the image the farther away it is. That's the, so we're faced with those limitations. And our signal does drop out around Turks and Caicos. So there is no coverage in the Caribbean. There's no coverage in Puerto Rico. We get some NextRad information from Puerto Rico because there's a government installation there. So if you're sitting in Miami, looking at a storm coming from that direction, you can see it. But if you're physically there, you're out of our actual satellite signal range.
Right, and there was a question about that. Hopefully that addresses Rui's question as well, because he mentioned it's satellite service. Why are there limits to the range or coverage?
I'll touch on that a little bit more. Our satellites are what we call geostationary. So we have two satellites broadcasting at all times, one on the broadcasting to the West Coast and one broadcasting to the East Coast, and then they overlap. And your receivers are designed to pick up whichever signal coming in is stronger. But those satellites have a focused beam that covers that area that we showed on that second slide. So that's why there is a cutoff point. These are stationary satellites. They hover over North America at all times.
Okay. I think for now, those are the most appropriate questions for this section. There are a couple more that we didn't address, and I've written those down, and we'll address them later on after we get through some of those other sections. So let's move right along.
Okay, so we'll go back to our main weather page. We'll hit the menu button. We'll go to our weather layers feature. And now the next one we're going to look at is cloud top information. And personally, I don't use cloud tops a whole lot because as you can see there, it tends to clutter the screen. But it does have some key advantages. If you're looking for some shade, for example, when you're out fishing, if just maybe a shady spot, if you can see a spot cloud like I've highlighted here, might be throwing some shade on a particular area. But also when there are storms present, if you just go to this cloud view mode, you can see I've clicked on that cloud and it's brought up that information box, and I go to that information box and it shows me the cloud top height. Well, the higher the top, the more severe the storm is going to be. So 5,000 foot, not so bad. We're talking, wispy clouds. But if there's something happening at 15,000 feet, 20,000 feet, that's probably going to wind up being something that's going to give you some storm activity. So interesting to go take a look at if you're concerned about you're seeing some really dark clouds off on the horizon. Go turn on your cloud tops and take a look at what those heights are. So next, lightning. We turn on lightning, and you can see here off of Tampa, I got a shot of a really nasty little lightning events going on. And I'll take it one step further and add the weather radar to this image. So now we've layered two pieces of weather information, lightning and storm, and we've zoomed in. We can see where the heavy rain is, and we can see where the lightning strikes are occurring. And you'll notice the lightning strikes are two different colors. This is because we only show recent strikes, and the most recent strike is going to show up that bright yellow. And then as it starts to fade, then it's going to darken. The lightning strikes that you see on screen are something that has occurred within the last 15 to 20 minutes. So anything older than that, we won't show it on screen because that convective activity is dissipated or moved on or whatever. So you're only going to see where recent strikes have occurred. Jeff, I think you had one or two thoughts about looking at lightning.
Yeah, this is one of the features that I use the most out of the whole service, especially, we do the majority of our boating in the Gulf of Mexico, and we get a lot of pop-up storms in the summer. And, I use this exact layout that you've got here so you can see the intensity of the storm along with the lightning, because sometimes you'll have a intense piece of the storm with no lightning, but then a less intense piece that might have more lightning with it. So it's important to have both those turned on, because for me, I'd rather deal with heavier rain and no lightning than thinking I'm getting into a weaker part of the storm, but having a bunch of lightning associated with it. And it helps you pick a line to drive through, and it really gives you an idea of how much lightning's occurring based on the cluster size of the bolts. And it's important also to pay attention, like you said, to the colors of the bolts, because it really gives you an idea of which side of the storm's dying out. And if you don't have the option to return to a safe harbor and you're going to have to go through it, you obviously want to pick the side with the older bolts that haven't been as recent.
One other interesting thing to note here, lightning is detected from satellite, not from our satellites, from different satellites, but we actually have global lightning coverage. So where I mentioned earlier where NEXRAD radar only reaches out about 180 miles, you can see a cluster of lightning strikes in the middle of the Atlantic. And if you happen to notice that cluster is coming towards you, then even though there's not precipitation there, because you can't see it, it may be just because it's out of radar range. But where I always say where there's smoke, there's fire. So, you know, it's for those of you that are out in the Bahamas, pay attention to this lightning information, because this could be telling you something that radar can't tell you. Okay, moving on. Go back to our weather layers menu. Now we're going to select sea surface temperature. And for those of you that are fishing, or for those of you that are doing a crossing from Florida over to the Bahamas, for example, the Gulf Stream is a current, and it does, you know, affect progress. So it's nice to be able to see. And this is a gorgeous picture that was just taken about a week ago, where the Gulf Stream is running up along the Carolinas right now, and then off out into the Atlantic. So you can see a crisp, clear picture. What we're looking at here is the color actually represents where the water temperatures are changing. So I'll zoom in, and I've clicked on the blue here, and then I go and select weather info, and I'm getting my sea surface temperature right there. So that blue area is 57 degrees. And then I've moved my cursor down here, and this is warmer water. And so not only we talked about it being a current there, but Jeff, I'll let you talk about what the advantage of a temperature break is.
For sure. I mean, anybody that's going out looking for pelagic fish, you know, you're getting out there and doing some trolling, you know, finding these temperature breaks is critical. And, you know, a lot of the seasoned guys can see it, you know, based on the rip in the water, you know, visually when you're out there. But to be able to go to your screen, you know, you're leaving, okay, I got exactly 20 miles, and then I can start looking. It really helps. And when you get to that warm break and you see the rip and you put 2 and 2 together, I mean, that's a recipe to catch some fish right there.
Right, so where I've got my cursor here on this orange area, temperature 79 degrees. Now there is a color chart in your Lighthouse manual, which you can access from your display, or, you know, came with the unit when you bought it. Raymarine doesn't put a legend on the screen where you can actually see what the colors are on the screen, but you kind of get used to them after a while. You can, you know, figure blue is cooler water and orange is warmer water. And again, anywhere you tap on screen, you hit the weather info, and there it is right there giving you what that temperature is. So going back to the weather layers menu again, now we're going to turn on wind information. So here's an example we took off of Martha's Vineyard of what the wind is doing. And we can see right here, there's a circle with a dot. That means winds are light and variable. So virtually no wind at all right there. Next over here, we've got winds out of the southwest at 25 knots. Now I know the speed and direction based on that symbol. What we are seeing here is the dot is basically the fixed point, and this, it looks like a flagpole. The flagpole itself is pointing into the wind, and if you listen to a weather forecast, they always say winds are out of, meaning where they're coming from. So the wind is coming from the southwest, and these other tick marks on the end that look like the flag, I can tell there's 2 long ones and a short one, so that's 25 knots. Over here we have just 2 longs, would be 20 knots. Over here we have 1 long, that would be 10 knots. So the wind direction here is all the same, but the speed of the wind is different increments, and that's how we tell that information. And then down here, we've got a 5 knot out of the west indicator. So that's your wind information. Now, wind can also be shown as an arrow instead of what we call a wind barb, which is what we were just looking at. This is how you can go into your settings menu where we found our radio ID earlier, and your wind symbol, you can choose arrows or barbs. I don't prefer the wind arrow information because it's not as easily identifiable. The speed is not as easily identifiable. So these are two circles. The wind speed is two different speeds right here, and you can barely make it out because the shaft is just a little bit darker on this one. So the wind there is a little bit stronger, and it's showing the direction the wind is going to, not the direction it's coming from. So that's they do give you this option to use. But personally, I prefer the barbs because I can see both pieces of information crisp and clean at the same time.
All right, so we stopped for questions again, and there are certainly numerous questions that were appropriate for the section that we just covered. For those who had additional questions, there are still some areas that we will cover, and if not, we'll get to your questions. I know there were several questions about chart pletter, type, or model number, and we will get to those. Dan, regarding temperature breaks, this is from Roy, aren't the differences or the distances between different temps too far apart, 20 miles, 50 miles or more, which makes it difficult to go from one area to the other, practically speaking?
Well, the resolution up to about 20 nautical miles from shore, the resolution is in 1 kilometer increments. And then offshore, it's 2 kilometer increments. So the thing to know here is these temperature breaks do move around a little bit. Our objective is to get you close. And then once we've gotten you close, you should be looking at your temperature readings on your transducer. So we're going to get you within range, and then you're going to see that temp change. You're going to cross that temp break, or as Jeff mentioned, seasoned anglers can look out across the water and see where the break is occurring, just because when warm water hits cooler water, it can form a current. Or also, it will push weeds up. That's the reason, one of the reasons weeds tend to run in lines is because they run along temperature breaks. Jeff, you have anything you want to add on that?
No, I think you got that spot on. I failed to mention earlier that that's a great starting place to look for weed lines, but you're right. And in the question he asked, is it reasonable to run across those different temperature breaks? A lot of guys use the service tournament fishing, and you may run hundreds of miles looking for the right fish on a given weekend. And so I think running 10, 20 miles, to get to that next temperature break's not out of the question.
Yep. Here's another question for you guys. Why are the sea temps updated every 3 hours? Probably a good one for you, Dan. Why are the sea temps updated every 3 hours versus a shorter time cycle?
It's because when the satellite makes a pass. And that's just changed recently. It used to be every 6 hours. And we have a new satellite up. NOAA launched a new satellite last fall, giving us more recent update times.
And then last but not least, is our sea surface temps available in the Bahamas?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so those are the ones most, here's another question that just came in from Matt. Are all pixel dimensions the same for radar, temperature, etc.?
No. As I just mentioned, there are 2 pixel dimensions for temperature, and the radar is more akin to the higher resolution sea surface temperature. They're at about a 1 to 2 kilometer range.
Okay, and what about sea surface temperature in the Great Lakes?
Yes, absolutely. All the Great Lakes are covered.
Great. All right, let's keep moving. I know we got a lot more slides to get to, so and keep the questions coming. Great questions, by the way, everybody.
Okay, might have to start talking faster. So here we're going to go turn on our Watchbox feature. So Watchboxes are when NOAA broadcasts a warning for a specific area. So Great Lakes, this is Lake Michigan as an example. This big red square shows up on screen, and again you can click on it, and you see down at the bottom there it says Watchbox data, and it's going to tell you there's a thunderstorm warning for that area, and then it tell you various information like what areas are included in that weather. But it does actually typically a lot of times on the coastline you'll see these Watchboxes will be in the marine zones, and those lines dividing up Lake Michigan, those are different marine zones. A lot of times they'll put the boxes in specific zones to identify where the storm activity is. And Jeff, I think you said this is something you use as well.
I leave the watch boxes turned on all the time simply because, you know, I'm not constantly watching the weather. And while I'm out there, I'll have it on detail on the chart plotter. And then I'll flip the weather, take a quick peek at it, flip back to detail. And when I flip to weather, if there's anything that's forming that may be too far in the distance for me to see, but still coming my way, I want to be able that jump off the screen so I can start planning right then what we're going to do with it.
Right. Good stuff. So back to weather layers. Here we're going to look at wave height. So now the color of the water no longer represents sea surface temperature, and it works like a toggle mechanism. So if we turn on wave height, it'll automatically turn off your surface temperature information. So we've got wave height showing up, and there's this ugly red spot over here. We go click on that, and we ask for the information about that, and we've got, 16 footers, 12 seconds apart. Nasty stuff. I don't think we want to be there today. And just as an example, a different color range, I've clicked on the light blue over here, and we bring up light blue, and we're looking at 4.5 footers, 16 seconds apart. So, you know, some smaller, longer rollers type of information. So that's your wave height. And then Raymarine also uses the same color palette type design for wave period. So here we can see we've got a red spot, and we go look, and the wave period, 19 seconds. So, and again, these color references are in your manual telling you what colors mean what, but it's probably easiest just to click on screen and see what those colors, and after a while you'll figure out that, you know, red is bad and blue is not so bad. Lastly, we're turning on wave direction. So here, very simply, it's just going to bring up arrows on screen showing you which way the waves are running. And interesting note, another reason I use wind barbs and not arrows for wind is because I like seeing the arrows for the wave direction, and I can turn on wind information and wave at the same time. And you'll see that a little further on in the seminar.
Okay, lots of good questions. And I just want to quickly jump back to sea surface temperatures. We don't have to go back to that slide, Dan, but there was a question, and there was maybe a little bit confusion. Our satellites are stationary. The satellites that pick up sea surface temperatures are not. So all that data,
satellites.
Yeah, different satellites. And that data is obviously aggregated for us, and then we pipe that up to our satellites and then broadcast it down to your boats. So
yeah, the sea surface temperature uses an infrared satellite. That's how they pick up the temperature.
Yep. Okay, here's a couple appropriate questions for you on this section, Dan. When a watch box comes up, it completely blanks out everything under it. Is there a way to adjust the opacity color?
No, there's not.
I guess the option there would be to turn off once you see a watch box, and then to turn it off so you can see the content under it, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's what I do. I'll look at it. If the watch box pops up, I'll go in and turn that off, and then look at my Stormcast and see what's coming, where it's coming from.
Next one is, how often are wave heights updated?
So wave heights are, the current conditions, are updated every 20 minutes. And then we also forecast wave heights. So there is a 3 hour, we show you, we give you current conditions, 3 hours out, 6 hours out, 12, all the way up to 48 hours out. So at 12 hours, they go to 1 hour updates. So it's for current conditions, it's 20 minutes. And then for more long range purposes, it's an hour for your wave height information.
Okay. And hopefully that answered Kevin's question. Kevin, if not, I know you were talking about future forecasts, but feel free to chime in again with more clarification.
Yeah, and then we'll be covering that too. I'll be going in the future forecast.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then last but not least from Nick, what are the best practices to best use wave predictions?
Yeah, again, we're going to get to some instances, and I think Jeff and I will both have some comments to share about how to use it when we get there, just here shortly.
All right, good stuff. Keep it coming, everybody. Let's move on.
And we've got some support emails. We'll also have these coming up at the end of the seminar as well. And again, Jeff mentioned we'll be emailing you the recordings of these seminars. So here we've got 3 things turned on: wind, wave height, and wave direction. And as I mentioned earlier, so I can see in that picture I was looking at off of Cape Cod, we can see that our waves are basically coming out of the southeast, but the winds are coming out of the southwest. So it's going to be a little choppy out there because you've got wind and wave opposing each other, so to speak. Although not too bad right here, because the light blue is telling me the wave height is about 4 footers, and the dark blue in there, dark blue is 1 foot or less. So we can also animate this information, and these are the items that can be animated. You can animate pressure, wind, and all of your wave information can be animated. So what animation looks like is this. You select your animation screen like we did up before, and you can see it's running through the cycle of wind right here, and it's showing us 12, 24 hours out, 36 hours out. So we can literally see how the wind is shifting, and I'll play this back a little bit here so you can see it again. We start back at the current information, and we hit the play button, or you can use the buttons to move back and forth through the cycle so you can look at a specific time. So example, if we want to see what's going on 6 hours out, I've stopped it. So you can see 6 hours out, and then we can go look at 24 hours out and see how the wind is shifting around. And Jeff, you mentioned how you use this information.
Yeah, I like doing that. Like, I'll turn this on if we'll leave on a Friday and actually stay out overnight, Friday night, Saturday night. And it's nice, to turn this on, get an idea of what direction the wind's going to be, how strong it's going to be, when we're planning where we're going to end up spending the night out on the water.
Also, if you have more than one choice of an inlet to run in or out of, say you run out of one inlet in the morning and you're out fishing, you may want to look and see when you're starting to head back in, and you might have an hour or 2 hour run back in. You might want to see if you want to go back in the same inlet, or if it looks like a washing machine at that inlet and you have a plan B, you can run a different inlet. This is another advantage, to be able to see this information in advance and what it's going to look like. So we've animated wind here, and you can animate wave information the same way, and this is wave period we're looking at here. As you can see on the right-hand side, you can choose. You can either look, the history would be the storm rain that we were looking at early on in the webinar. And then here we're looking at, we were just looked at wind, and we've shifted down to period. And also you can look at barometric pressure information the same way and see how that's going to be changing over the next 48 hours. So here we're going back to our menu. And I got just a little bit more. I think we'll stop for questions again.
Yeah, and this is marine zones, I believe. So we're going then to weather, into settings. And marine zones is one of my favorite features of our weather service. I just think it's super useful. And for those of you, most of us that have been on the water long enough have listened to that garble VHF weather report that cycles around, and it's nearly impossible to figure out exactly what the report is in your zone, or it comes around to your zone and you've just spaced it because you get distracted, or just really hard to listen to. So with that in mind, NOAA has created these marine zones. They're displayed on your screen by turning on the boundaries. And then you simply click in the zone you want to see detail on, go to weather information and reports, and you pull up a very detailed report. First and foremost, you have to go to the marine zone forecast at the top. So make sure you're clicking on that, and you'll get a full forecast for that area. And this is super useful, not only for your zone, but let's say you're traveling, whether you're a cruiser or you're an angler, you're going from one marine zone to the next. You want to find out exactly what the forecast is in that area. So very useful information when you're out on the water. Okay, questions. And I know we've got a lot coming in here. And stand by for those that are all asking about models and displays and that kind of stuff. We will get to that. Dan, a couple of slides ago, and we can go ahead and go back up to this. I think it was slide 75, if you don't mind scrolling back up to that. The question is, what are the white spots in the ocean on the screen? No coverage?
What do you say, 70?
70, right here is fine. You can see the blue and the white.
That's the chart. That's where the contour changes on the chart. Now there is a different example. I'd have to go way back to sea surface temperature. You'll occasionally see a little bit of white showing up. Maybe I can see it happened. Yeah, here. Down right here, there's a little bit of spot showing up. That's where the resolution changed. We went from coastal resolution to offshore resolution. So that sometimes they don't marry up. The edges don't quite cleanly marry. They're supposed to overlap one another, but they don't always do that. So you'll occasionally get a little bit of white area where there is the difference in the two resolutions changes.
Okay, and then another question is, can you program the system to see all three, wind, wave height, and temperatures?
So you can program the system to see wind and wave, one of the wave features. Well, two of the wave features, because I had it shown in the one example. I was showing wind, speed, and direction using the barb. I was showing wave direction, and I was showing wave height. Because wave height and wave period both use the color of the water, and as an example, you can't have both of those. So that's the only limitation, is when you're using one of the color examples. So you could, for instance, you could have sea surface temperature turned on and see wave direction and wind speed and direction. Or you could see wind speed and direction and wave direction and period or height.
All right, and then there was a question too. Let's see here. Oh, is there a legend or a key for the colors so you can tell exactly what the colors represent, Dan?
Yeah, as I mentioned, you have to go to your manual to get that information. It's in the manual, in the lighthouse, not in the operation manual or your chart plotter. The Raymarine has kind of two manuals, but it's the lighthouse software that goes into all the functions that the MFD can do. There is a weather chapter in that gives you all that information.
Yep, and then last, and then we'll move on, is there a way to adjust the opacity of the weather radar? Transparency, I assume, is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, not on the Raymarine.
Yep. And then for all of you that you know, feel like we're going rapid fire, and I know we are, we just had a lot of slides to cover. We will be sending this out to everybody who signed up for this webinar. So rest assured, in the next week's time, you will have this in your inbox. And if not, we're going to give you our email address that you can reach out to us directly. All right, so let's talk about compatibility. I know there was a lot of questions about what displays to use. And currently, the Raymarine SR200 is the most current Raymarine weather receiver. It is compatible only with the Axiom series of multifunction displays. So some of you may have older plotters. Some of you may have the old SR150 or previous weather receiver. But for the current weather receiver, the SR200, you need an Axiom MFD. Anything to say about the old ones, Dan?
Oh yeah, I'll jump in here. You know, Raymarine has had serious weather capability since 2005. So going back to the old C series, capital C, are weather capable. And you know, there are older receivers out there on eBay and stuff, and they still work. A lot of them still work. And we still support them from a signal aspect. You can still, if you have an old C-Series, and a SR50 was the first one Raymarine built. I've got one, running in the shop. They still work just fine. They still overlay weather just fine.
Yep. And Dan, do you recall the E-Series? There seems like there's a decent amount of people on the call that have the E-Series.
Yeah, there's lots of E-Series, because there was a capital E, there was a lowercase e, there was an ES, and they all work. And up until Axiom, everything prior to Axiom would work on any of the SiriusXM receivers. A 50, a 100, a 150, you could use any of them. Axiom will only work with the SR150 or the SR200.
Okay. Hopefully that answered everybody's
question. Yeah, and the E-Series won't work with the SR200. That's you have to go with an older receiver if you have an E-Series. There's a lot of E-Series out there.
Yep.
So Axiom is the only one that uses the SR200 at this time anyway.
Here's a question for you, Dan. Is there a better data efficiency by running multiple antennas, one for the plotter and the other for music, etc.?
Not really. If you have a long cable run, there might be a little bit of signal loss. So it might slow down the data delivery a little bit. I have heard of that happening. But realistically, I would say no. These units all use Raymarine's always used the Shakespeare Sirius antennas, and Shakespeare makes a splitter that you can get to put into the system, so you can have two independent. You can use one antenna for a Sirius radio tuner on one side and a Sirius weather tuner on the other side.
Okay, last question before we move on. Any plans? Let's see here. Any plans to add currents?
No. Currents are something we haven't really looked at yet. Number one, because many currents are predictable. Your tide current tables are predictable 100 years out, and a lot of the plotters have that built into them, so you can go up and see what currents are doing, what the current currents caused by tides. Ocean current data is something that's a little different that we're looking at, but I can't say that anything's going to happen with that anytime soon.
Okay, moving right along. Next screen. So these are our current offers for those of you who do not have a weather receiver. It is the SR200, as I just mentioned. Its current price has dropped. It is $449 retail MSRP price. And then, of course, even though we're not the hardware manufacturer, one of these electronics companies, SiriusXM does kick in a $100 rebate. Fairly straightforward. The rebate lasts until December 31st, 2020. So you simply sign up for your service, and then you go to this site, SiriusXM.com/marine rebate, fill in your details, and we'll send you a $100 Visa gift card. And Dan and I both can vouch for this, that quite a few people take advantage of the rebate. Why wouldn't you? 100 boating bucks back for you. And then the second is our offer for you. For those of you who want the coastal tier, we have a 2-month trial offer of our coastal tier service. And you can learn more about this at SiriusXM.com/webinar.
So we always do like to touch a little bit on the music, what made SiriusXM great. All SiriusXM weather receivers, all current model weather receivers, are also SiriusXM audio capable. That means you don't need a separate tuner. You can use this weather receiver. You can see there's an audio out right there on the box, and you don't even need a Sirius ready stereo to use audio out of a weather box. All you need is a stereo with an auxiliary in port. This cable runs out of this box and right to the aux in on your stereo, and you can change your SiriusXM channels right from your plotting screen. That's a screenshot of an Axiom plotter there, and you can change your channels right there on screen. You don't even need a stereo head. All you need is an amplifier and speakers, and you can put the audio right into the amp and do everything right from your MFD. So it's a relatively simple setup.
Okay, about the tiers. So the coastal tier is our middle tier. The coastal tier has sea surface temperatures out to 24 nautical miles and just doesn't have the forecasting capabilities of our highest tier, which is the offshore weather tier. So those are our two tiers currently available. There were some questions about fish mapping, and eventually Raymarine will incorporate fish mapping. And the question was, is the SR200 capable of fish mapping? And that will be the receiver capable of receiving fish mapping. So stand by for that announcement in the not too distant future. And then, of course, as Dan mentioned, there are entertainment or music packages, and provided you bundle them together on the same subscription, we throw in a discount for those. So the select service is $11.99 a month, and all access is $16.99 a month. So you're roughly saving, $5 a month by adding those together to the weather account. And then we always like to point out for all of you who are living in the northern latitudes or have your boat up on the hard, there's no sense in paying for the service if you're not using it. And we encourage you to seasonally suspend as opposed to either just letting the service run or deactivating it. If you deactivate the service, you really have to call back in and set yourself all back up again. And if you use seasonal suspend, you can do this for up to 6 months. You simply call in, you choose the date that you want your service suspended to, and then on that date, we'll ping your system with a wake up or a refresh signal, as Dan was alluding to or talking about earlier, and then your system will wake back up. So definitely use seasonal suspend when you're on the hard or off for the season. All right, as far as getting set up and activated for those of you who are not current weather subscribers, first, of course, you have to purchase the SR200. You choose your subscription package as we just went through, and then you go to SiriusXM.com/Marine Activate, or you call the 855 number here to subscribe. Fairly straightforward. Please make sure you are calling this number as opposed to just the general SiriusXM radio line. You just may get bounced around if you do that. So we encourage people to call this specific number that goes to our marine subscription fulfillment firm. Some resources for everybody on this call. Again, we will send out this webinar recording. We do have more resources online. Dan and I on a regular basis are producing more videos, putting those together and putting those on our site. So the main website is SiriusXM.com/Marine. We have a dedicated video library, and you'll notice if you look close enough, you'll see Raymarine is one of the tabs on that. So you can always click on that Raymarine tab, and it pulls up exclusive videos just on Raymarine plotters. And then, of course, we have a YouTube channel that's has a whole host of information. And for anybody who wants to follow us on a more regular basis, we encourage you to follow us on social media, facebook.com/SiriusXM Marine, and then at SiriusXM_Marine on our Instagram page. And we do have a lot of questions. I know Dan mentioned earlier, if you have any questions outside of this webinar and you need our support, whether that's tech support or a question about attaching audio, whatever it may be, feel free to reach out to us, marine.support@SiriusXM.com. We will do our best to respond to you as promptly as possible. And then on the Raymarine side, theirs is more of a forum, but from what I understand, they respond within 24 hours, and that's raymarine.com/support. So we will stay on for more questions, and it looks like there are quite a few coming through. So feel free to stay on if you want to hear the remainder of the questions. Otherwise, we really thank everybody for joining us. Stand by for that webinar recording that we'll send you in the next week. And be well out there, stay in touch, follow us, and thanks again for joining us. And otherwise, we'll stay on indefinitely until we've gotten through as many questions as we possibly can. So I'm going to go start looking through this chat list now. And for everybody else who wants to jump off, thanks for joining us. All right, Randy asked a question about videos for Furuno, and we have a Furuno webinar coming up next Tuesday, Randy. So you go through the exact same webinar portal. It's just SiriusXM.com/Marine webinars if you want to sign up for Furuno. Thank you. Lots of nice, kind comments. We really appreciate it, and glad you guys joined us. Is there an app from Sirius or Raymarine? Dan, you want to field that?
Yeah, not yet. If you're on the boat, you can use the Raymarine app and use your tablet as a additional viewing device. But as far as getting our weather data at home off of the internet, we do not have that capability at this time.
How often are sea surface temperatures updated?
That was every 3 hours.
Yep. So the older SR-150 will not have fish mapping is the question, and the answer is no. You need to have the SR-200. Can I upgrade to an SR box and connect to a C-120? I'm not sure if you know the answer to that, Dan. If that's
the C-120 will work with anything up to an SR-150. It won't work with the SR-200. I would personally not use an SR-150. I would use an SR-100 or an SR-6. They're slightly older models. You're going to be able to find them at a better price, and they're going to work a little bit better because they're a little slower baud rate, and that series plotter can handle that a little bit, digest it a little easier. So that would be my recommendation. Yep. SR-6 or an SR-100.
There was another question about sea surface temperatures from Mark from a sailor's perspective, and we may have failed to mention that sea surface temperatures, while they prove very valuable for anglers who are looking for those temp breaks where the bait may stack up and pelagics may hunt the bait, they're also very valuable for sailors that are going offshore. Because if you look at sea surface temps, you'll see exactly where the Gulf Stream is.
Right. I did mention that early at the beginning of the slide.
Oh, good. Okay.
Very briefly touched on it.
Great.
The Gulf Stream is a several knot current, and it's going to a sailboat crossing it. You're going to notice it for sure.
Nick says, you mentioned something about updates further offshore aren't updated as frequently. Does that apply to everything?
No. Sea surface temperature is everywhere is 3 hours. The wind and wave information is farther apart for the longer range forecasts. So be it a 12-hour forecast for inland or offshore wouldn't matter. It's just where the point is if you want to know what the weather is going to be doing tomorrow, we're going to give you updates on that every hour. We figure you don't need that information as quickly. And the reason we stagger our data the way we do is so we can fit as much information down the pipe as possible and give you as much information as we can. So that's why the information is staggered the way it is.
And then clarification for Mike. Dan and I work for SiriusXM Marine, and Jeff is a Raymarine Pro ambassador. So there's no official Raymarine team members on this call this evening, but you do have their support number. If you have Garmin-specific questions, their support email is right here, raymarine.com/support.
Yeah, and if you do have any questions, you can always email them to marine.support@SiriusXM. And if we don't know the answer, we probably know who at Raymarine to talk to get the answer, and we can either get you their contact information, or we can determine find your answer for you.
Right. And Mark, thanks for the additional clarification regarding sea surface temperatures, which show the location, but showing the velocity of the current and the eddies is essential for offshore sailing. Yep. And that's just something that we don't offer, but certainly something we have considered. So appreciate your clarification. Here's one. Does the presence of big tropical storms slow down the stream, especially more than one at a time?
No, it does not.
Okay.
A lot of people, I'll say that water does not block the signal. Those of you that have Sirius in your cars know if you're driving in the mountains or something, the signal will go in and out because foliage does interfere with the signal and mountains interfere with the signal. But on the open water, we don't have signal issues like that. Rain and clouds do not interfere with our bandwidth.
All right, let's see if there's anything we may have missed. Here's a real funny one, Dan. You won't be able to answer this. I don't think anybody is challenged capable of answering. What's the airspeed velocity of an unladen European swallow? Good humor there. Appreciate that, Tom. All right.
It's European. We don't have coverage in Europe.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you for all the kind remarks from everybody who joined. Hopefully this was informational. Oh, it looks like we have one more coming in. Steve, please clarify the larger white areas in the ocean. I think that goes back to your slide 74, 75.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. In the ocean, white areas would more than likely be chart related, not SiriusXM signal related.
Right. So that might be array specific.
Oh, or wait a minute. No, big white area. I know what the reference is to, the sea surface temperature information. There's a large lobe of sea surface temperature. We took our sea surface temperature information out to Bermuda because we actually have people that pick up signal in Bermuda. So for the Bermuda fishing tournaments and so forth, we took our fishing, even though our signal didn't really go that far, except in rare instances. We put the information all the way out there. And consequently, when you're looking at sea surface temperature, there's a hard white line that sort of kind of runs along the U.S. coast, and then it loops all the way out and encompasses Bermuda and then loops back in and runs the rest of the way down towards the Bahamas. So that's our cutoff point on our sea surface temperature. So that might be what that white was in reference to.
Got it. All right. We will stick around for just another minute or so if there's any last minute questions. And again, if not, no worries. marine.support@SiriusXM.com is where you can find us and ask us any technical questions you have.
If we didn't answer that white, I'm sorry, I get stuck on it. If we didn't answer that white question completely, when you get the recording, seminar recording, do a screen grab of the exact slide you were referring to and the white spot you were referring to, and send it to marine.support@SiriusXM, and we'll address it exactly so we know we get that answer to you.
All right. Anything else, Jeff Fletcher or Dan, you want to add before we wrap this up?
Nothing for me. The only other thing that I use a lot is that Stormcast feature because it gives you the directional arrow and the speed of the actual storm cell itself. But that's the only thing that I had to add there.
Great. And thanks again, Jeff, for all your support. We really appreciate it. Dan, anything else?
No, sir. Thanks all for joining. Really appreciate it. Keep the questions coming.
All right, folks. Have a fantastic evening and stay in touch, please. Good night, all.